Hi, and welcome to Always Bring a Book. On today's episode, I got to chat with Shen Tao, the author of The Poet Empress, which comes out on January 20th via Taurus Bramble imprint. I'll play a bit of chapter 1 and then roll the interview. And as always, I'll talk about what I'm reading in upcoming episodes afterwards. Thanks for listening.
Macmillan Audio presents The Poet Empress by Shen Tao. Read by Catherine Chin and Eric Yang. One. Fruit from nothing. House of the azalea, where thorn meets bud, brother betrays brother, blood forgets blood. Unknown Literomancer, Azalea Dynasty, year 607. My sister Larkspur was the 5th child we buried. It was a cold and misty dawn as Ma and I climbed the hill out of our village toward the ancestors. We carried with us only some incense and a bamboo casket small enough I could tuck it under one arm. The 5th time had been the easiest. She had been so little when she left us, only 3 days old. When Ma wept yesterday, when Larkspur's tiny chest had stopped rising, I suspected that she mourned not her daughter, but all the extra bowls of rice she'd consumed during her pregnancy, nutrition that was now wasted. Ba didn't even weep. He might have wept, I thought, if Larkspur had been born a boy. My brother Bao was still young enough to believe dead girls became kittens in their next life. He liked kittens, so he did not weep either. So it happened that of all of us, I was the one who mourned Larkspur the most. Not as much as the other times, but I did cry as we lowered the casket on a bed of poppies at the crest of the hill. As I knelt next to the box on the damp soil, I remembered how I had already nicknamed her in my head. Little Lark.
My guest today is Shen Tao, the author of the debut fantasy novel, The Poet Empress, which is coming out in just about a week on January 20th, right?
Yeah, that's right.
For listeners meeting you for the first time, could you introduce yourself and tell us what the Poet Empress is and what kind of story you most wanted to tell with it?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me, Craig. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Shen Tao. I'm a debut fantasy author of The Poet Empress, which is about a young woman in the fictional Azalea dynasty where women are not allowed to read. And she is suffering from famine. Her family is suffering from famine. So the only option she sees is to offer herself as concubine to the emperor's cruel son, Prince Terran. And And after she arrives in court, the only way she finds to survive his cruelties and to save the nation from him is to write a poem, a magical poem that will kill him in a world where she's forbidden to read. So she has to learn to read in secret. And the other catch is that the poem must be written with love in order to take his life. So she has to eventually, through the story, come to understand him, maybe not love him romantically, but the love that one human can't help but feel for another human once they understand them completely. And that's the kind of love that is more so explored in the book. And I'm excited for it to be out in the world on January 20th.
Yeah, so exciting. Congratulations. Although this is your first published book, this is not your first book. I read in a previous interview that you've written 8 other novels before this one. Is that right?
Yeah, it's been a really long journey to get here.
What did those earlier books teach you, and what did you need to maybe like unlearn about writing or the book industry to, reach this exciting moment with your debut coming out?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I viewed those books very much as my training wheel books. They were for me to learn the craft. And, when I was writing each one, I definitely thought this was going to be the one. This book is going to be it. And only in hindsight do you realize that those books they were not it. Um, and that can be for a variety of reasons. Sometimes I felt like the plot wasn't there. Sometimes I felt like the themes weren't there. And sometimes I just didn't feel like the books were true to myself and what I
Mm,
wanted to put out in the world. I will say that before the Poet Empress, I wrote a few books that were maybe a little bit more to the market. I was so frustrated with not being published after trying this writing thing for so long that I there were a few books in there where I felt, okay, let me just try to write what I think is going to get published rather than what is true to my heart.
mm,
So maybe something that I needed to unlearn was to when I wrote the Poet Empress, I finally set all that aside and I was like, maybe let's just write from the heart and let a story come out. And once I returned to that, once I came back to the reason I was writing in the first place, that became the book that ended up being my debut. So that was something I needed to maybe return to and unlearn.
God, I love that. Do you think that you'll ever revisit those older books and, with your new knowledge, either rework them or reshape them and then, try to publish those as well? Or are those like you said, the training wheels and they're in the past?
That's a great question too, and my opinion on this changes constantly. So if you hear in another interview like, "Oh, I really wanna go back to them," that might, be me on a different day. I really do love those stories, I love those characters, I love those worlds, and when I write and I suspect this is the case for a lot of writers, that when they write characters, they become really attached to them and they feel like real
Mm,
people, and if you don't publish those books, it feels like giving up on those real to you people. So part of me will lament the stories that are untold of these characters I've grown to know and love. So I don't know. I would really like to come back to them one day and maybe with my new skill as a writer, revisit those themes that are maybe not there yet, those plots that are maybe not
yeah.
there yet. But I will say that The Poet Empress is so different from anything I've written before, thematically and in tone. It's so much darker. It's I feel like it almost irrevocably changed the trajectory of my career and the direction that my future stories are going to go. So I don't know, maybe one day is a short answer.
Yeah, I love that. Now that your book's about to enter the world, like you said on January 20th, what part of it feels the most vulnerable to you? As readers are encountering them now and going out to the bookstore and getting it.
I think there's something inherently vulnerable about publishing a book, just straight up for any author to it's often an endeavor that takes us months or years and you put so much of your heart and soul into it when it's out in the world. It's like people are staring into your soul. And sometimes I get a little bit nervous or all up in my feelings when I realize that friends are gonna, people I know day to day, they know I'm a writer. They don't know what I'm writing about, but they'll pick up this book and potentially be like, oh, this is what goes on in Shen's mind. Her mind is really a really dark place. So I think there is a bit of vulnerability just by putting something out, and especially something as personal as the Poet Empress, which is I think the first or, of the 9 books that really drew from my personal culture and, the
Mm,
Chinese culture that I grew up inspired by and my family, so I think there's an extra degree of this book is really, really personal to me.
yeah. I could never do it. I'm way too thin-skinned. I would be up late at night looking at, like, Goodreads comments and just, like, lamenting if they weren't great. So, like,
Oh my
it
gosh.
takes a lot of courage, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think the first, few reviews, you're always like, "What are people gonna say? What are people going to say?" Eventually, I feel like, I'm not quite there yet, I think, but eventually, I'm sure there will come a point where, this is the book is out there, you can't change anything, and it is what it is, and people will like it, and some people won't, and that's okay, we all have different reading preferences. So, just glad that it's gonna be out there.
You mentioned this a little bit earlier, while we were talking that you kind of made the conscious decision to stop, like, writing toward the market and, write this story of, from your heart. Once you decided to make that shift, how did that change your relationship with your writing process?
That's a great question too. I think The Poet Empress is a very unique story in that it's almost a story about stories. Unique to me, sorry, my writing history, not that it's, the singular story about stories in the world. In that I was a lot more conscious of the writing process itself when I was writing this book than I was the previous 8 books. As I was writing The Poet Empress, I was writing a story about a character who was writing a story. I was writing making art about a character who was making art. So, almost by necessity, I was very conscious about all the narrative choices I was making. Some of the themes in the story are about who gets to tell stories and what truth is, and the various facets of how a story comes to be. And I was very conscious about all the choices I was making, whose perspectives I was showing. So it led to a very unique writing experience that way. I don't know if that answered your question.
No, definitely. You mentioned that it didn't fully come together until you found the Heart Spirit poem. And I love unique magic systems. I'm thinking, like Metal Magic in Mistborn or Blood Magic in the Darker Shade series by V. Schwab. And I'm curious, like, what is it about poetry that made it the right vehicle for magic in your book?
Those are great books, by the way. I love the
Yeah,
both those
I love
series.
both of those books.
Yeah, they're fantastic. I think poetry, as it's described in the story, is truth and emotion. That's basically how the magic system works. If there is enough intent, if there's enough expression in the poem, then there is magic in it. And part of me genuinely believes that when it comes to storytelling, it is a mode for conveying truth and emotion.
Mm,
So those parallels were really interesting and really exciting to me. And the fact that there is an emotional core to the magic system, I think was very important to me and really helped bring the story together because in the writing of the poem, you weren't just mechanically producing magic. You were actually finding the story behind it. You were getting to know characters, you were getting to know the setting and the history and the narrative in a deeper way. And for those reasons, I think the magic system is truly what ties the story together for me.
yeah, I love that. And I think any fans of fantasy are really it's gonna resonate really well. So I'm excited to see how this is received in a little bit of time. Speaking of it being published, publishing feels right now like so intertwined with like all of the book online communities. So think Book Talk and Bookstagram and Discord and Threads and all of that. And I've seen your book in those communities a lot already. We were talking earlier before we started recording that I've literally seen a video of this like person like hugging their art and like crying and saying like how it's like one of their favorite books they've ever read. And it's got to be so exciting to start seeing that. And I'm curious, like, what has that been like watching the Poet Empress travel through some of those online communities even before its publication?
Honestly, really exciting and really emotional. I think we were also talking a little bit before, but I think an author never really knows how their story is going to be received until it's in the hands of readers. So seeing those early reactions makes me really excited for the book to be out and for it to spread a lot more and get into the hands of more readers because I know it's already been finding its audience. And to be
Mm.
honest, I think the very first the very first readers who read and love the book are truly everything. I remember, and this is something I try to hold on to even as an author goes through their publication journey, the milestones, the goalposts keep moving. I keep on coming back to a thought I had when I had just finished writing the book. My agent was just starting to send it out. And I thought to myself, if one person reads it and really likes it and really gets it to its core, I think I'm gonna be fulfilled as an author,
Wow.
and I genuinely thought that. So, yeah, and once, that person came, I think, there were early readers who said it was their favorite book ever. There were readers who said, "I understand the story," and I had this I had this, 68-year-old granny write to me on my public author address, and I thought it was spam at first because the subject line was like I forget what it is, but it was like I didn't think it was gonna be a genuine mail, so I almost threw it out, but I clicked into it, and it was genuinely the most heartfelt,
Oh,
encouraging message I had ever received, like, I almost teared up reading it. So I think those things are truly everything, and I hope I hold on to that, and I hope will use that as encouragement to write my next books.
God, that's awesome. I love that. For writers trying to do what you're doing, right? Breaking into publishing, with such this public online era that we're in terms of writing, what kind of things actually made a difference, for you? And then what other things were ended up just being, not worth the time?
That is a really, really great question, and I totally understand where you're coming from. I think as when I was just starting out as a writer, that was something I was worried about as well. How much of a social media presence do we need to have when we go on submission, when we go through this process? I will say that I truly didn't start up my Instagram. I'm not on TikTok at all, but I didn't start up my Instagram until like well after my novel sold. So
Wow.
definitely you don't need to have a presence when you're going out on submission. Although I hear rumblings that it's changing, so I'm cautious about letting my survivorship bias, color, the advice I'm giving. But I will say that I think that it's not necessarily necessary for your book to sell. I think afterwards, it might be good if you're comfortable with it to start one up, and you'll have like 10 followers at first, and that's okay. But as readers keep finding your book, they'll naturally want to see what's going on. And I kind of grew into that a little bit. That's another thing I want to impart on aspiring writers is that you don't have to be this, an online person from the get-go. I think authors are naturally very shy creatures. We don't want to we were just talking before before this podcast that I fumbled an interview really hard this morning, and I was so nervous and stumbling over my words like every single sentence. And I think that's okay. I think it's okay to be nervous about posting or being online. At first, I was tremendously terrified. But I think the more time passes, especially, the more comfortable you can be. And yeah, I think it's a process, and that's okay.
Yeah, I really like that, and I don't I like when authors don't or any kind of public figure might stumble over a word or seem nervous. It's so more genuine and authentic versus someone that's like completely buttoned up, you know. So I wouldn't fret about the interview this morning, you know. One more quick silly one about online is why is your handle Story Goose?
Oh, yeah, I really, really love geese. They are my favorite animal. I think they're just so aggressive and territorial, and they've got a bad attitude, and I think that's everything. So I just really appreciate geese, and I thought it was a bit of a fun thing, we had a lot of conversations about, like, branding and how to present online, in our debut author communities. And the best advice I think I got was just to be yourself because that's what's sustainable, right? Before Story Goose, I think I had a handle that was just my pen name, and I tried to be a little bit more professional but I think landing onto this playful thing that brings me a lot of joy has helped immensely actually with my online presence because I love geese, not all days I wake up and I love my book, but every day I love geese. So I think it really helps a lot.
That's such a funny animal to be one of like, I feel like if you ask like 100 people what their favorite animal is, like maybe just you would say geese. So I end every episode with asking, not for a book recommendation, which I used to do on a previous podcast, but I like to ask for one good thing, and it can be anything. It can be a book if you want, but it could also be like something you've started cooking recently that you love. Just anything that's kind of bringing you joy right now that you think listeners should give a try.
I won't pass up an opportunity to recommend one of my fellow debut authors, so I'm going to have to try to recommend Burn the Sea by Mona Tawari. It's a historical fantasy and like the Poet Empress, and it is also about female empowerment, and it's about this badass queen who really existed, but Mona took it upon herself to write her in a fantasy world where she fights against people who are trying to take over her country, and she really stands up for her. She stands up on behalf of her people and her country, and it's just so well done. So I hope you all give it a read.
It sounds excellent. Thank you. Before I let you go, is there anything that listeners should know about you or anything upcoming or just anything you want to plug? And where can they find you online?
So you can find me online at shentao.ca, and I will put in a plug for content warnings. If those can be useful to you, they can be found at shentao.ca/content for the Poet Empress. I'm on Instagram at Storygoose, and I am working on a YA series at the moment, which I can't wait to share more about.
I want to know more about it right now. That sounds exciting. Well, thanks for your time today. I really appreciate it. It was really nice to get to know you.
Yeah, it was so lovely talking to you, Craig, and thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to that interview, and make sure to grab Shen's book on January 20th. To get a signed copy, head over to Seattle's Queen Anne Book Company. To do that, head over to qabookco.com. Before I go, I wanted to recommend a book that I'm about halfway through right now titled True Story, Murder, Memoir, Mea Culpa by the author Michael Finkel. A few years ago, he wrote a book that I was obsessed with called The Art Thief, so I was really excited to pick this one up too. It is a true story, obviously, of the author's fall from grace after he changed some details in a story people found out and he was fired from the New York Times. You'll read all about it in the book. At the same time, he found out that someone who was accused of murdering his family was using his name while like on the lam. And when he got caught, somehow the two of them got to meet and became like a, I don't want to call it a friendship, but I don't know how else to explain it. But Michael interviewed him and flew down to visit him, and they exchanged letters, and he wrote all about it in this book. And it's a story of redemption and love and deceit, and it's really you don't have to be a fan of true crime to really get into this book. I could not put it down. So I would really recommend that. Go grab it from your local indie and enjoy. On the next episode of Always Bring a Book, I sat down with Lucy Zhao, one of the co-founders of the social reading and book tracking app PageBound. We discuss how the company was founded, why the company is very anti-AI, and why the social aspects and gamification are central to their business. So if that sounds interesting to you, A, download PageBound right now and give it a try, and B, follow the podcast so you can listen to that episode in about 2 weeks. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.